Popolo della Ridda, oggi abbiamo un'opera di dimmitudine che viene smontata da David Wood. Nel 2016 il canale all'epoca molto conosciuto All Time 10 aveva pubblicato una serie di fregnacce in un video e quel loro video era chiamato 10 bugie che ti hanno detto sull'Islam. Ecco, tra le varie fregnacce che vennero dette in quel video ci sono 3 punti assurdi che David Wood smontò in una sorta di trilogia. Ecco, in questa occasione io ho messo insieme i 3 video di David Wood in uno solo. Questi 3 video li avevo già tradotti qualche anno fa. Iniziamo subito con il mito della trascurabilissima minoranza nel mondo islamico. Ascoltate bene, poi riprendo il commento per presentarvi la seconda parte.
I just watched one of the stupidest videos ever made. Part of the reason it's so stupid is that it's not supposed to be stupid. In other words, some videos are supposed to be stupid, so their stupidity isn't as stupid. But when a video isn't trying to be stupid and it ends up being shockingly stupid, that's a special kind of stupid. Obviously, I'm talking about the video 10 Lies You Were Told About Islam, which got more than 1 million views almost instantly. I don't know what planet this video came from, but there definitely aren't any signs of intelligent life there. As the title suggests, 10 Lies You Were Told About Islam is an attempt to respond to lies about Islam. Now, several of these lies are things you've never heard before. For instance, did you hear that someone once claimed that the population of Birmingham, England is 100% Muslim? Neither did anyone else with a life, but the geniuses at All Time 10s were careful to refute this claim that some person you've never heard of apparently said somewhere. Since the video does try to respond to some more serious charges, we'll look at one of the responses here in part 1 of Fact-Checking 10 Lies You Were Told About Islam. I'm sure you've heard the claim that many Muslims support violence. There are plenty of polls showing what percentages of Muslims in different countries support various kinds of violence, suicide bombings, targeting civilians, and so on. And it would have been interesting if the video had shared some of the actual polls and discussed them. Instead, the video makers decided to prove that their intellects are rivaled only by garden tools. Watch what they do here.
Extensive research conducted by the Pew Research Center identifies 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, of which only 0.006625% identify with extremism.
The narrator makes it sound like Pew Research found that only 0.006625% of Muslims identify with extremism. Let's do a little math here. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and the video insists that only 0.006625% of these Muslims identify with extremism. That would be a grand total of 106,000 Muslims in the entire world who identify with extremism. Now, I hereby challenge anyone to show me where Pew Research ever said anything so ridiculous. In fact, just so you understand how confident I am, I'll say this. Muslims of the world, I will bow down and recite the Shahada if you can show me Pew Research claiming that only 0.006625% of Muslims, 106,000 Muslims, identify with extremism. Listen to the clip one more time and then start scrambling through some Pew studies in a desperate attempt to convert me.
Extensive research conducted by the Pew Research Center identifies 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, of which only 0.006625% identify with extremism.
The only part of this claim that comes from Pew Research is that Pew Research estimates that there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. So where does the 0.006625% come from? All Time 10s doesn't tell us, but fortunately, I already know. It comes from the blog of a Mr. Dave Cecil, whose blog is called Words About Things. Pretty creative title there, Dave. Let's read some of his words about things. In a blog post shortly after the recent terrorist attack in Paris, Mr. Cecil writes, "Let's not get it twisted, though," said the man who's about to twist everything. "The members of these groups are the extreme minority of a religion with approximately 1.6 billion followers. Last year, CNN estimated around 106,000 people are members of or identify with these organizations. That means about 0.006625% of the Muslim population are extremist. Of course, that number might be and probably is higher now, but even if you triple or quadruple it, we're still talking about an extremely small percentage of Muslims. Do the Westboro Baptist Church or Ku Klux Klan accurately represent the moral tenets of Christianity? Of course they don't. Neither does ISIS represent the entirety of Islam. We shouldn't lose sight of that. Mr. Cecil links to a CNN article from which he derives his 106,000 figure. But what does the CNN article actually say? Let's do the difficult work of clicking on the link. We read from CNN, "If we tally up the low and high estimates for all these groups, we can begin to have a sense of the total number of jihadist militants that are part of formal organizations around the globe. We found that on the low end, an estimated 85,000 men are fighting in jihadist groups around the world. On the high end, 106,000. The CNN article is talking about the total number of jihadis fighting as formal members of terrorist groups. It's not addressing how many Muslims in the world identify with extremism. Now, notice the progression here. CNN estimates that there are up to 106,000 actual jihadis fighting as members of terrorist organizations. And by the way, CNN doesn't include members of Hamas or Hezbollah in the estimate. A Mr. Dave Cecil, on his Words About Things blog, misrepresents this by saying that the estimate refers to people who are members of or identify with these organizations. So now it's not just the fighters, as CNN reports, it's also the people who identify with these fighters in some way. Then he misrepresents the figure even more by claiming that these are the only Muslims in the world who qualify as extremists. And All Time Tens runs with this and declares,
only 0.006625% identify with extremism.
But it gets even stupider. We could go through some of the real polls from the past several years. Here we would find, for instance, that according to a 2010 study by Pew Research, even after Osama bin Laden's popularity began to wane, 51% in the Palestinian territories, 28% in Jordan, 24% in Indonesia, 23% in Egypt, and 18% in Pakistan said they had confidence in Osama bin Laden. We'd find that according to a 2013 study by Pew Research, 99% of Muslims in Afghanistan, 91% of Muslims in Iraq, 84% of Muslims in Pakistan, 82% of Muslims in Bangladesh, and 74% of Muslims in Egypt want Sharia enforced in their countries. The same study by Pew Research shows that 89% of those who want Sharia enforced in Pakistan, 85% in Afghanistan, and 81% in Egypt say that stoning should be a punishment for adultery. The same study by Pew Research shows that 86% of those who want Sharia enforced in Egypt, 82% in Jordan, 79% in Afghanistan, and 76% in Pakistan support the death penalty for people who leave Islam. These numbers don't add up to 106,000. They're in the hundreds of millions. Anyone who suggests that only 0.006625% of Muslims identify with extremism is either a few clowns short of a circus or a compulsive liar. But we'll save these statistics for another video. The reason 10 Lies You Were Told About Islam wins first prize at the Stupidity Bowl is that the description box includes links that supposedly back up the claims in the video. And the study that's supposed to show that only 0.006625% of Muslims identify with extremism says no such thing. In fact, if you actually click on the link, you can see that the numbers are much, much higher. For example, the Pew study we're directed to says that 20% of Muslims in Nigeria have a favorable view of ISIS. Let's once again do the math. The population of Nigeria is around 182 million. More than 40% of the population is Muslim. And again, the Pew study we're sent to says that 20% of these Muslims have a favorable view of ISIS. 182 million people times 40% of the population that's Muslim times 20% of Muslims who have a favorable view of ISIS comes out to more than 14.5 million Muslims in one country who have a favorable view of ISIS. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone gives the thumbs up to ISIS, I'd say he identifies with extremism.
Only 0.006625% identify with extremism.
And how do viewers react when they hear this nonsense? I nearly choked on my falafel when I saw a video actually telling the truth about Islam and Muslims. Great work, guys. Keep with the truth. I am a Muslim, and I am glad someone made a video like this. Finally, you preached the truth about Islam. Agreed. Thank you guys so much for this video. 19,621 Christopher Hitchens fanboys are butthurt. Thank you for having such an open mind and telling the world the truth about Muslims. Subscribed. Beautifully done, guys. That's exactly what I wanted to tell world. We never support violence. It's the media. Thanks for clarification to the word. Very informative video. Keep up the good work. Thanks for your video. May Allah bless you two and everyone in this world, regardless of faith and skin color. Very powerful video. And that's why people make videos like this. If you want to win the endless praise of certain Muslims and liberals, all you have to do is spout a bunch of utter nonsense in defense of Islam. It makes no difference whether it's true or false. Lie about statistics, falsely claim that Pew Research agrees with you, post links that conclusively disprove what you're saying. Your target audience won't care, and the people who do care, well, they weren't going to agree with you anyway. But here we have to ask our Muslim friends, don't you want better than this? Can your religion be defended without this kind of deception or not? When you cheer on all-time tens for lying, it makes it sound like you want video makers to lie. Like it or not, there are frightening numbers of Muslims in the world who support some very dangerous, very extreme practices. I understand that many Muslims don't support these practices, but when the Muslims who don't support these practices nevertheless support lying about the statistics in order to cover up the massive numbers of Muslims who do support the practices, how do you think that looks to the rest of us? If you want to show that you're really against extremism, you should condemn videos like this. You should say, stop lying to defend my religion. My religion doesn't need your lies. We have a problem in Islam and we need to address it honestly, not deceptively. Don't lie about Islam in a video claiming to refute lies about Islam. But how many Muslims are saying this? So those are a few thoughts on just one of the many blunders of a 7-minute video that's about as illuminating as a hockey puck to the forehead. If you'd like to look at some more, let me know in the comments section. In the meantime, be sure to share this video with the commenters over at All Time Tens. Most of them seem to have less going upstairs than a one-story house. As enticing as it may be to leave them that way, they are our brothers and sisters in humanity. And if they don't hear the truth from us, they're not going to hear it at all.
Nella seconda parte invece si parlerà del falso mito secondo cui l'Islam avrebbe a cuore l'incolumità dei kuffar. Ecco, l'immagine che voi vedete qui, in particolare quello che viene scritto per definire i due autori di quella minchiata di video, contiene un piccolo spoiler, molti di voi comunque avranno già capito.
In our last installment of fact-checking 10 lies you were told about Islam, we saw the wildly popular YouTube channel All Time Tens do an absolutely spot-on impression of a spineless Western politician or a gullible CNN anchor. They perfectly nailed the whole, I'm so dumb I can't pour water out of a boot even if there are instructions on the heel attitude we've come to expect from nearly everyone who tries to tell us about Islam. But All Time Tens keeps the parody going by fabricating Quran verses. Responding to the claim that the Quran commands Muslims to kill non-Muslims, All Time Tens declares,
The Quran specifically says the opposite, stating one who kills a non-Muslim person under protection will not even smell the fragrance of paradise. And whoever hurts a non-Muslim, I shall be adversary to him on the day of resurrection.
Now you can read the Quran until your brain melts. You're not going to find these verses. For you doubters out there, I'll once again demonstrate my level of confidence by proclaiming that I will bow down and recite the Shahada if you can find these verses in the Quran. Much like the Shahada and Islam's 5 daily prayers, these quotations don't come from the Quran. They come from the Hadith. And this is hilarious because these quotations don't even sound like they come from the Quran. Anyone who's spent any amount of time reading the Quran can spot the style difference instantly. So, someone who attributes them to the Quran might as well wear a sign around his neck saying, I'm as sharp as a bowling ball. But attributing these quotations to the Quran is a minor blunder compared to how the meanings are distorted. All Time Tens makes the quotations sound as if they're about being nice towards non-Muslims. Let's take a closer look. The first supposed quotation, again, is,
"One who kills a non-Muslim person under protection will not even smell the fragrance of paradise."
This is a fairly common hadith that can be found in several collections. I'll read one from Sunan an-Nasai. Sunan an-Nasai 4753. The Prophet said, "Whoever kills a man from among Ahl ad-Dhimma, he will not smell the fragrance of paradise, and its fragrance may be detected from a distance of 70 years. Notice the Ahl ad-Dhimma part. This is about dhimmis. It says nothing about non-Muslims in general. The other supposed Quran quotation is also about dhimmis. Listen to this distortion.
"Whoever hurts a non-Muslim, I shall be adversary to him on the day of resurrection."
Sounds like it's about non-Muslims generally, right? This hadith is more obscure than the other, but you can find it quoted in a number of books where it's attributed to Al-Khatib. The hadith actually says, "Whoever hurts a dhimmi, I am his adversary, and I shall be an adversary to him on the day of resurrection." Once again, this is about dhimmis. What's a dhimmi? A dhimmi is a non-Muslim living in an Islamic area who's agreed to pay the Muslim community in exchange for not being killed and for being able to continue practicing Christianity or Judaism. The Jews of Khaybar are a good example here. In Sahih al-Bukhari 23:38 we read, "When Allah's messenger had conquered Khaybar, he wanted to expel the Jews from it as its land became the property of Allah, his messenger, and the Muslims. Allah's messenger intended to expel the Jews, but they requested him to let them stay there on the condition that they would do the labor and get half of the fruits. Allah's messenger told them, 'We will let you stay on this condition as long as we wish.' So the Jews agreed to stay on the land and do all the work, but they would give half of their annual produce to the Muslim community. This contribution was called jizya. We read about jizya in the Quran, Surah 9, verse 29, a verse you should be memorizing. "Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." The Quran says that jizya is accepted from among the people of the book. Dhimmi status was only open to monotheists who had received a book from God. Polytheists had much more limited options. So Jews and Christians had a privileged status that they could continue practicing Judaism and Christianity provided they paid the jizya. Even though paying jizya was better than being killed, it was still a sign of humiliation. In the introductory hadith of Book 56, Chapter 88 of Sahih al-Bukhari, Muhammad says, "My livelihood is under the shade of my spear, and he who disobeys my orders will be humiliated by paying jizya." Ibn Kathir, Islam's most respected Quran commentator, explains jizya as follows in his commentary on Surah 9, verse 29. "Paying jizya is a sign of kuffar and disgrace. Allah said, 'Until they pay the jizya, if they do not choose to embrace Islam, with willing submission, in defeat and subservience, and feel themselves subdued, disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of Dhimma or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated." So, why weren't Muslims allowed to kill dhimmis? Umar, one of Muhammad's closest companions and the second of the rightly guided caliphs, explains why in Sahih al-Bukhari 3162. "We said to Umar bin al-Khattab, 'O chief of the believers, advise us.' He said, 'I advise you to fulfill Allah's dhimma, financial obligation, made with the dhimmi, as it is the dhimma of your prophet and the source of the livelihood of your dependents, i.e. the taxes from the dhimmi.'" It's the source of the livelihood of your dependents. Dhimmis are where you get the money to feed your families. Dhimmis are the people funding the Muslim community. This is why Muhammad said, "My livelihood is under the shade of my spear." Now, if dhimmis are the best, most reliable source of income for the Muslim community, should a Muslim be allowed to go kill them, decreasing the income of the Muslim community? Imagine a restaurant owner who pays the mafia protection money. Will the mob boss let one of his underlings go kill the restaurant owner? Of course not. Why? Because the mob boss loves the restaurant owner so much? No, that's where the money comes from. It's the same in Islam. So, the ahadith quoted by all-time tens, which the video makers think come from the Quran, are about not killing Jews and Christians who have agreed to pay the Muslims protection money. But the video makes it sound as if Muslims just aren't allowed to harm any non-Muslims. Unfortunately for all-time tens, both the Quran and the Hadith have plenty to say about fighting non-Muslims who aren't dhimmis. The sad part here is that this section of the video is supposed to be responding to the claim that Muslims are commanded to kill all non-Muslims. And that's actually a false claim. Muslims are not commanded to kill all non-Muslims. We've just seen, for instance, that Christians and Jews were allowed to live even in a Muslim state as long as they paid for that right. But instead of going through the Muslim sources and explaining what Islam teaches about unbelievers, All-Time Tens shares a couple of ahadith they found in a Google search, pretends these quotes are found in the Quran, and distorts the meanings. These guys haven't even been subjugated and they're already acting like dhimmis. I think a couple of villages are missing their idiots. Anyway, that's two. Should I keep going or move on to something much more difficult, like rearranging my sock drawer? I kind of feel like I'm clubbing a baby seal here. Let me know in the comment section.
In questa terza parte tocca ad un altro proclama apologetico, quello secondo cui l'ISIS non avrebbe nulla a che fare con l'Islam in quanto gran parte delle sue vittime sono i musulmani stessi.
All right, people said I at least had to make this a trilogy, so welcome to part 3 of fact-checking 10 lies you were told about Islam. All-Time Tens is an enormously popular YouTube channel with more than 4 million subscribers, so you'd assume that they know what they're doing and that they're pretty careful about their top 10 lists. But as we saw in the first 2 parts, if you gave these guys a penny for their thoughts, they'd have to give you a refund. Listen to this All-Time Tens narrator respond to the claim that ISIS represents Islam.
In reality, ISIS is not just un-Islamic, it is anti-Islamic. And in the first 8 months of 2015, ISIS was responsible for the deaths of over 9,000 Muslims in Iraq alone.
So ISIS is not only un-Islamic, it's anti-Islamic. Why? Because ISIS has killed lots of Muslims. What's the unstated rule here? If you kill Muslims, you can't be a real Muslim. Okay, pop quiz. What kind of Muslims does ISIS kill? Do they kill A, Muslims they regard as upstanding, faithful, devout servants of Allah? Or B, Muslims they regard as hypocrites and apostates? The correct answer is B, as in, boy, All-Time Tens has some really stupid writers. Why do we need to point out that ISIS kills Muslims they regard as hypocrites and apostates? Well, because All-Time Tens is under the delusion that Islam condemns killing any kind of Muslims in any situation, and that's sheer nonsense. But don't take my word for it. Surah 9 verse 73 of the Quran says, O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites and be unyielding to them, and their abode is hell, and evil is the destination. The word for strive hard in this verse is a form of the word jihad. Allah commands Muhammad to wage jihad not only against unbelievers, non-Muslims, but also against hypocrites, people who claim to be Muslims but aren't really obeying Allah and Muhammad. Can you think of any groups that are waging jihad against unbelievers and hypocrites and are unyielding to them? I certainly can, but All-Time Tens insists that anyone who obeys Allah's command to wage jihad against hypocrites isn't a real Muslim. What about apostates? In Sahih al-Bukhari 69:22, Muhammad proclaims, whoever changed his Islamic religion, kill him. Now, when we think of apostasy, we think of someone renouncing his religion. But the Muslim sources are filled with warnings about doing things that show you're not a real Muslim. For instance, Surah 4 verse 65 of the Quran says that if you have any resistance against Muhammad's decisions, you're not a real Muslim. The verse reads, But know, by your Lord, they can have no faith until they make you, O Muhammad, judge in all disputes between them and find in themselves no resistance against your decisions and accept them with full submission. Do you see the massacre starting to brew? Muhammad orders his followers to kill apostates, and the Quran says that if you find any resistance against Muhammad's decisions, you're an apostate. Put those together and you've got an ISIS-style bloodbath on your hands. And Muhammad's closest companions launched an ISIS-style bloodbath when people in the Muslim community found resistance against his decisions. When Muhammad died, certain Muslims refused to pay zakat, alms in Islam, to the administration of Abu Bakr, the first of the rightly guided caliphs. Abu Bakr said that if they don't pay their zakat the way Muhammad taught, they're apostates. Sahih al-Bukhari, 7284. Narrated Abu Huraira, when Allah's messenger died and Abu Bakr was elected as a caliph after him, some of the Arabs reverted to disbelief. Notice that the passage says that these people reverted to disbelief. It turns out that the people discussed in this passage simply weren't paying their zakat properly, and this was enough to put them in the apostate category. Umar said to Abu Bakr, "How dare you fight the people?" while Allah's messenger said, "I have been ordered to fight the people till they say, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah, and whoever says La ilaha illallah saves his wealth and his life from me, unless he deserves a legal punishment justly, and his account will be with Allah." Abu Bakr said, "By Allah, I will fight him who discriminates between zakat and salat, prayers, for zakat is the compulsory right to be taken from the wealth. By Allah, if they refuse to give me even a tying rope, which they used to give to Allah's messenger, I would fight them for withholding it." Abu Bakr's response to Umar is, we can't discriminate between zakat, alms, and salat, prayers. In other words, if someone stops praying the 5 daily prayers, we recognize that he's no longer a Muslim, but the same prophet who told us to pray also told us to pay zakat. So if someone refuses to pay zakat, he's an apostate, and even though we're not supposed to kill good Muslims, we are supposed to kill apostates. That's when Abu Bakr launched what are called the apostate wars, cleansing the Muslim community of hypocrites and apostates. Can you think of any Muslim groups today who are trying to cleanse their lands of hypocrites and apostates? I can, and it's no coincidence that the leader of the most familiar of these groups gave himself the name Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Abu Bakr of Baghdad. So Abu Bakr killed Muslims he regarded as hypocrites and apostates, but the violence in the early Muslim community didn't stop there. Never stopped. Abu Bakr's daughter Aisha, famous for being Muhammad's child bride, eventually led an army against Ali, the fourth of the rightly guided caliphs. Their armies clashed at what's known as the Battle of the Camel. Now think about this. Muhammad gave Aisha the title Mother of the Faithful. Muhammad gave Ali the title Commander of the Faithful. The Mother of the Faithful led an army against the Commander of the Faithful, and around 10,000 Muslims died in bloody combat. Perhaps all-time tens will try to convince us that Abu Bakr and Aisha and that entire first generation of Muslims weren't really Muslims. But what does Muhammad say? Sahih Muslim, 6470. The Messenger of Allah was asked, "Which of the people are best?" He said, "My generation, then those who come after them, then those who come after them." Sahih Muslim 6478. A man asked the Prophet, "Which people are best?" He said, "The generation to whom I was sent, then the second, then the third." What's the best generation of Muslims? According to Muhammad, the first generation. But the first generation of Muslims almost annihilated itself by butchering one another as hypocrites and apostates. And yet the brilliant scholars of Islam over at All Time Tens, along with politicians and reporters around the world, tell us that ISIS isn't Islamic because ISIS kills Muslims whom they happen to regard as hypocrites and apostates. Well, I'm sick of arguing, so I'm just going to grant what All Time Tens and President Obama and Prime Minister Cameron say. If you kill Muslims of any kind, you're not a Muslim. But let's follow this claim through to the logical conclusion. The first generation of Muslims killed Muslims, so the first generation of Muslims weren't really Muslims. And Muhammad said that those Muslims were the best Muslims ever. If the best Muslims ever weren't even Muslims, then there are no Muslims and Islam is a dead religion. So, in their effort to rescue Islam from criticism, All Time Tens ends up obliterating Islam and insulting all Muslims. Great job, All Time Tens. Remind me never to get on your good side.
Ringrazio David Wood per questi 3 video che aveva pubblicato 8 anni fa e ringrazio te che ancora non ti sei iscritto, che adesso cliccherai qua in mezzo sul pulsantino di iscrizione. Ti ringrazio tantissimo, bravo, adesso di anche ai tuoi amici e parenti di fare altrettanto. Alla prossima!